Okay, so let me start. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar or talk or discussion, however you call it. And I just wanted to take 1 minute to talk a little bit about us. We are called as History Walas. We are a small outfit. We are interested in anything to do with Indian heritage and history. So we work on different kind of projects. You can call some consulting, basically in this field, in this domain of history and heritage. We do commission research. We also work on curation projects for museums, for example. Then we also work on research and documentation. Um, and then we also conduct, which is our most, I think, public thing that we do is we also conduct like walking tours in Bangalore and also tours elsewhere in the Deccan. So till now, we have been largely focused on the history of Deccan because that is where most of our work has been till now. So uh, so that's about History Walas, and we don't have a website yet. Unfortunately, we are quite lazy that way, but we are present on Facebook, Instagram, if you want to reach out to us for anything. So we thought that since we are not been able to do much in this due to this pandemic, we thought we'll do a series of webinars, which will be knowledge sharing sessions from experts in the field. In the mostly from the Deccan region, but throughout India. So definitely from India, let's say. So it will be all our webinars will be focused on Indian heritage or history/history rather, right? And today we are going to, like you must have read and selected or opted to join this talk today, we are going to touch base on historic water systems, rather early modern water systems of Bijapur city. Um, so before I hand it over to the expert who is going to conduct this session today, which is Saparya Varma, I thought I'll take a couple of minutes to just talk a bit about history of Bijapur and Deccan and why we thought talking about the water systems of Bijapur is a good idea. Um, so one of the things, I don't know how many of you have been to Bijapur or are aware of Bijapur from last couple of decades or so. I was born and brought up in Bijapur, and if like me you were born and brought up in say 80s and 90s in Bijapur, one of the things we always, one of the problems we always faced as Bijapurians was water scarcity. So, I mean, most of you who grew up in Bijapur would remember that we would get water supply only in like once in 15 days, in summer sometimes once in a month also, which actually created a lot of friction among neighbors, and there were a lot of such issues, and water was always a problem. I remember going almost 2-3 kilometers on cycle to get water for our home. So that is how I grew up. And then when I read in history that historically Bijapur had these great water systems which were famous all over the were well known all over the world. It was a great surprise, needless to say, right? So even today, although Bijapur now has considerably better water supply, etc., it's not as good as not as good as say some other cities in the state, in our state, in Karnataka, that is. Definitely not as good as Bangalore or Mysore or the southern part of Karnataka. Right? We still get water supply, say once in 3 days, once in 2 days. That is best case. In summer, it's once in 4-5 days. So this is so in that context, we were very interested always in kind of this water. I personally at least was. And so when we thought of starting these webinars, I thought one of the first things to probably talk about is Bijapur. And since most of you will already be aware of Gol Gumbaz, which is behind me right now, that's where I'm sitting. Gol Gumbaz and many other monuments like Ibrahim Roza, etc. But not much has been written about or spoken about in terms of the early modern or historical water systems of Bijapur. So we thought it would be a good idea to talk about that. One of the reasons is because, as you know, in the historically in the 14th century, once the Tughlaq dynasty occupied the south in the Deccan for a brief period, they changed the political dynamic of the place entirely. And that invasion by the Tughlaqs and then subsequent receding back to Delhi led to creation of two different powers in south, new powers rather. One was the Vijayanagara, as we all know, who were based in Hampi, south of Krishna River, and other were the Bahmani sultans who emerged in Daulatabad actually to begin with, and then they shifted their capital to Gulbarga. So Deccan Sultans, what we call today as Deccan Sultans, emerged from early 14th century, which is 1347 AD, to be precise, year, and that led to eventually 5-6 sultanates emerging in the region, right? And if you look at early modern India or 15th, 16th centuries, these kingdoms, Vijayanagara and these Deccan Sultanates, northern Deccan Sultanates like Bahmanis, Adilshahis, Nizam Shahis, and Imad Shahis also, they contributed a lot to the dynamism of that India experienced, or the region of India experienced at that time, right? And since they were a new power, they also, there was battle for resources, right? So one was the battle for, say, the Raichur, Doab area, which was a very fertile area, and also the Kaveri Delta region with Godavari Kaveri Delta region. And then the western, of course, the western coast trade routes, maritime trade routes. And that is, battle for these three, resources, say, led to a lot of conflict between amidst all these sultanates, and also, the Vijayanagara kingdom. So basically all these kingdoms for a long time till the Battle of Talikota, which is 1565. And then, as we all know, after that, Adilshahi really became the center, the biggest power in the region. And they ruled till Aurangzeb invaded Bijapur and occupied in 1687. So that's a brief of this period that we are talking about today, which is from about 15th century and 16th century mainly, and 17th century. Post that, Bijapur has had a very, it's very interesting because before these 200 years and after these 200 years, Bijapur didn't really have a prominent place per se in the Indian society or Indian history, say, right? After the Mughal invasion and Mughals subsequent receding back of Aurangzeb, Nizams took over, then Marathas, then eventually it was a collectorate under the British rule in India. So that's a brief history of Bijapur. Before we start, I thought it would be just good to contextualize this, although Saparya will also do a little bit more. With that introduction, I wanted to hand over it to Saparya. Saparya is a conservation architect, and the reason why she is doing this is because she actually was involved in conducting a survey of these water systems that we are talking about in Bijapur for I think more than a year long period in Bijapur in 2016. So based on her own work is what today's talk is going to be. So we are going to focus mostly less on the political history, but mostly on how the water management worked, where did the water come from, how it was used, and what happened to those water structures. So that's the crux of today's talk. And I would request, if you have questions, please keep typing in the chat so that we can take questions at the end. I think about 6:45 or 6:50, we will, once Saparya finishes her talk, we can open it up for questions. Thank you. So Saparya, over to you.
Thank you, Basal, and thank you all for being with us today. Basal, I'd like to share the screen. I think you need to enable it.
Yeah, you should be able to now.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you all can see the screen. Can you, Basal? Could you confirm?
Yes.
All right. So, yeah, so thank you for the introduction and also about the brief history. I will be repeating a little bit of that just to set context, both historic and geographic. So like Basav said, I was involved in a very long, extensive survey that was commissioned by the district collector's office of Bijapur and taken up by an organization called the Indian Heritage Cities Network, which is based out of Bangalore. And I was part of this very, very extensive survey. We spent long months there surveying literally street by street and looking for water structures and remnants of it. So it was a very exciting survey, and I'm really happy to be able to talk about it now. I'd just like to start with this image, something that we're all familiar with. We see this almost every day. There are huge water pipes that tap water from rivers or other big sources that they convey it over long distances to inhabited parts. And on the right side, you see these huge water towers that literally dominate our skyline. What I want to talk to you about today and introduce all of you to is its 16th and 17th century, less monstrous looking Adilshahi counterparts. What you see on the left is a pipe, just like the one we saw in the previous slide. And what you see on the right is a water tower that was in use extensively for Bijapur's water system in 16th and 17th century. And it's not just about the pipes and water towers. There were a range of both collection and conveyance structures that worked together as a network to supply water. Of course, these are 400, 500 years old. So centuries of disuse has led to the deterioration of many of these structures, but I think they are present enough. Even today, you can see remnants of it in Bijapur enough to give us a clue as to how they must have functioned as a whole network. Just a very brief history. So it was only with the Adilshahis, that's in the 16th century, mid-16th century to be exact, that Bijapur really came into prominence. Bijapur was made the capital city of the Adilshahi kingdom, and they ruled for almost 200 years from there, and expanding till about 1686, expanding the territories till 1686, when Aurangzeb conquered Bijapur and it came into the Mughal dominions. After that, Bijapur and the area around it kept passing hands. It kept going into multiple dominions, like, for example, the Marathas and later the Principality of Satara, until in the 19th century, it came under British control. Now, again, it came back to prominence during the British period because they made Bijapur the district headquarters of the district of the same name. It was a Bijapur district. And what is also interesting is that several of the monuments from the Adilshahi period were adaptively reused by the British to function as residences and offices. So most of the monuments that we see in Bijapur today are from the 200 period rule of the Adilshahis and the additions done to them by the British rulers. And specifically, when we talk about waterworks, we are really talking about a 100-year period between the three rulers. That's Ali Adil Shah, Ibrahim Adil Shah, and Muhammad Adil Shah, who ruled from, let's say, 1550s, mid 1600s to mid 1700s. So most of the public works that we're going to be seeing today in the rest of the talk is from these three rulers' time period. Just a bit of acknowledgement to the material that I have referred to till now. Farish Shah was one of the first chroniclers in the Bijapur Adilshahi court. And since his time, everybody who came there as tourists, as chroniclers, has somewhere mentioned the water system of Bijapur. Even if it is just a brief, one line mention saying that there is abundance of water very close to the surface. But it's in the late 19th century that Henry Cousins, a surveyor for the Archaeological Survey of India, of Western India specifically, he discussed the water system of Bijapur in very, very great detail. And his map, the map that he prepared, is useful till now. Even on our surveys, almost 150 years later, about 120 years later, we're still using his map as a reference. And I'd also like to mention and credit Klaus Rotzer, who has written a monograph in French, but dedicated to the water system of Bijapur, where he builds on the theories proposed by Henry Cousins, and he discusses the structures in greater detail. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to the extent of Bijapur that we're going to be talking about today. I know a lot of you are from Bijapur, and you might already be familiar with it, but still, just so that we're all on the same page. One of the first structures that were constructed in this area was the citadel, or the Arkilla, what is called it. Now, this predated the Adilshahis. There was a structure there even before the Adilshahis made this the capital. And during the first Adilshahi ruler, the mud fort was encased in stone and made stronger. So this was really the first structure to come there when we are looking at phases of construction or a chronology of construction. The second one, an important one that we'll be discussing a little later today, is the city or the habitation of Shahpur. Now, Shahpur came up when Ali Adil Shah founded it. So as when he was coronated as the Adilshahi ruler in the mid 1500s, that's when he founded the city, and he was coronated in this place, and a habitation slowly spread around it. And it's only after the Adilshahi victory over Vijayanagara Empire, that's in the Battle of Talikota, 1565, that a lot of the public works, because I think all of the money that came in were probably used very well to build the public works in and around Bijapur. So it is around this time that the water system and the city walls of Bijapur came in. Now, coming to the next ruler, who was Ibrahim Adil Shah, he had this grand plan of building yet another capital city for himself during his rule. And that's when Navrazpur was designed and conceptualized. So about 7 kilometers west of the current fort of Bijapur, a whole new city was being developed, but sadly it was ravaged by Malik Ambar a little later in the 17th century, and Ibrahim Adil Shah had to retreat back into Bijapur, and it was never really constructed. The construction never really continued again. But the village of Torvi came up in that place, that's west of Bijapur. So just roughly to give you some orientation with today's places, on the south, let me just annotate here. So on the south is Bagalkot, is the road to Bagalkot that you see here. On the east is the road to Gulbarga. On the north is the route to Sholapur. And this is the Torvi village, the circle that I've drawn to the left of the map. That's the Torvi village that came up over the ruins of Navrazpur. All right. So, yeah. And again, so for those of you who have visited Bijapur and have not really been to Shahpur or Navrazpur, I'd like to introduce the popular landmarks, which is Gol Gumbaz on the eastern side, Taj Wadi on the western side of the city wall, I mean, just adjoining the city wall, and Ibrahim Raza, which is built just immediately west of the city wall. All right. So now coming to the water system, Bijapur was a place that was built in a valley, in a depression. So its immediate surroundings on the southern side and on the western side, that's the Torvi side, are much elevated, at least 25 to 50 meters elevated than the fortified city of Bijapur. And another point is that the closest river source, because otherwise Vijayanagara Hampi was built along the banks of the Tungabhadra, and most of our historic cities are built along the major bank of some major river or so. But that's not the case here in Bijapur. The closest river is River Doni, which is at least 20, in fact 20 plus kilometers from Bijapur. So what really happened is they had to depend on, they had to identify alternative sources. They couldn't really depend on the river, so they had to identify other sources for their water supply. And what they did is, in that the elevated area onto the west and onto the south, there were some major streams and surface runoff, and across these minor streams, across these streams, dams were built. Now, the technique of dam construction also predates Adilshahi. It has always existed during the Yadava time or the Chalukya time. It has always existed. So we really don't know how much of it was built during the Adilshahi or how much of it already existed when they came to Bijapur. But this was one technique how they made sure that there's large scale water collection for availability. Now, the ones that I've highlighted here are some of the major dams that we see. In fact, we only see 2 of them today. The rest of them, we see remnants of the bunds, but most of the reservoir beds have been used for agriculture, or it has developments have come up over it. But when even in the 19th century, when Henry Cousins surveyed these places, at least 4 or 6 major dams existed on the western side and southern side of Bijapur. Now, from these dams, and because they made complete use of the topography, because they were at a higher elevated level, they would use conveyance systems like pipes or tunnels, so that, and using gravity, the pipes and tunnels would convey the water from these elevated places to the habited areas of Bijapur and Shahpur. This is just to show you an example of the Ramling, what a dam really looked like. It's nothing like, in principle, it's similar to what we see today, but in height or in scale, it's really nothing like the dams that we see today. The older dams were built out of mud, and later, during the Adilshahi period, most of the dams were actually built or encased in stone. So what these are just huge embankments so that they impound the water behind it. This is from the dam near Shahpur, which I showed you in the previous slide. And as you can see on the right side, where there's a lot of greenery and farmland, this is where the water is supposed to have been collecting. But now most of it, because it's also rich, fertile soil, so most of it is used for agriculture. And in the middle of this dam, there always existed a structure, something which looked something like a pavilion, where people could rest and enjoy, but also I think the important function of it was to control the amount of water collected, which was to be let out into the city through these pipes and tunnels that I told you about earlier. And unfortunately, I don't have a photograph of the sluices, but they are they're these. I don't know if I'll do justice describing it, but they are these horizontal stone slabs. There is a round cutout, and usually a huge stone wedge would be inserted in it to control the amount of water. That's how the sluices really worked. And it was all manual. It was all manually regulated. So which means there was a huge team involved even in deciding how much water should go today, or oh, is there a flood? Okay, maybe we shouldn't release so much. So there was a whole lot of people who were engaged in that kind of decision making as well. Okay, so now this is one system where they collected water using just surface runoff or streams. Now they followed yet another system, a very unique and interesting system of collecting water from groundwater. So this is actually a Persian system. Many of you may be familiar with it. It's called a kanat or a karez in Iran and in the surrounding regions. But in India, it's known by various names. So it's called Kundi Bhandara. It's called Surang in some places. And in Bijapur too, we believe it would probably have been called Surang or Suranga. Now, the technique is this, that they would first dig a well at a place, at a valley or at a place where the groundwater is very close to the surface and cutting across the aquifer. They would build a well, which is called the mother well or the source of all the water that's going to be conveyed later on. Now, from this mother well, they would dig a tunnel in and okay, so this, I think I'll come back to this slide, but this is how, okay, let me go back to the previous one. So here you see a very gradual slope on the surface also. That's really not necessary. What is really necessary is that even the tunnel is at a gradual slope, so that the slope of the mother well is slightly above the outlet, which is usually called the mouth of the Kares or the surang. And so if you see, it's very different. The section, if you see, this is a section of Bijapur, where on the left, let me just annotate that. On the left, this region is really the mother well. And this is a representative section because the Bijapur surang runs for at least 3 kilometers. And it has several vents or these wells along its way. And you see that the surface is not really sloping towards the outlet, but it's actually undulating. And it is closer, I mean, it is at an elevation at the middle point. So if you're looking at the depth of these wells, at the beginning and at the end of the surang, it is usually about 20 feet or so. But there are the middle sections, that is these sections, it actually goes up to 45 feet. So yes. So this is the mother well in Bijapur. I'll just show you quickly in a later slide where it's located. But this is called the Surang Bauli, named probably after the tunnel. So when we went there for surveying, it was all closed off, and there was a colony or a house that was supposed to come up on it. But I think because it was brought to the attention of the district collectorate, it was quickly dug up or quickly excavated to reveal the tunnel that you see here. On the right side is a tunnel that originates from this Surang Bauli. And I mean, it's really unbelievable, the kind amount of water and all coming from a very, very small well such as this. So in Bijapur, this is where Surang Bauli is located. So for those of you who are from Surang Bauli, it's near the Afzal Khan's wives' tombs, or in the Afzalpur area. Right now, there's nothing. It's all agricultural field and scrubland, but slowly there are developments that are coming up. So from the Surang Bauli, as you saw, the tunnel originates, and sorry about that. Yeah, and it takes a southeastern turn, deflects. If again, those of you from Bijapur, it comes through the Sainik School campus there, through the compound of the district hospital, turns immediately right, and then goes eastwards into the city, or the fortified city of Bijapur. Ultimately, the overflow of it would probably have gone into the Arkilla, the moat of the Arkilla, or the citadel. Now, records also mention that inside the citadel, the surang would have branched off into 2 directions, one to the north and one to the south. The one to the south is what you see here. There would have been another branching north, but we really didn't find any evidence of it. Now, to draw water from the Kares itself, water bodies such as the Taj Baudi, and there are several other water bodies located along the course of the Kares, they would all be connected to this surang or Kares through earthen pipes, terracotta pipes. Again, I don't have a photo because we couldn't see any of the pipes remaining. So Taj Baudi, we know for a fact, was connected to this Kares or surang. And although Taj Baudi also had a natural aquifer, to supplement the water, it also drew some water from the surang. Okay. Yeah. So now, what does it look like? These tunnels or surangs. So in Iran, they were usually made or tunneled through sand or soil, so through sediments. But that's not the case. This system has been adapted in several places in the Deccan. So there is a Kares in Bidar, there is one in Daulatabad, there is one in Burhanpur. So you see versions of these adapted to local conditions in several places in the Deccan. But in India, the difference is that it was not cut through soil, but it was cut through rock, hard rock. So this is what the interior of the surang in Bijapur looks like. The photo on the left shows you right at the beginning and very close to the mother well, how it looked like. So if you notice, the bottom part of it, that's this part, is left, there is no construction there. It's not really been lined with masonry. But there has been a vault made out of basalt that has been constructed over to roof the whole surang here. So the reason for it is one is that the rock there in this part is very, very friable. So which means you wouldn't really want the whole thing to collapse, especially with water running through it. So which is why they really constructed a vault on top of this tunnel, but they left the sides unlined so that water from the surrounding regions would percolate into this thing. So this surang was not just conveying water from the mother well and its aquifer, but it was also conveying infiltrated water from along its course. You also see the opening here, which is called a vent or a well. And this is what opens up into the surface, 20 feet to 45 feet up. Now, the reason why these wells were made is that it was really necessary for the time of construction, because you couldn't really dig a 3 kilometer long tunnel without any ventilation. So for the purposes of ventilation was why it was first introduced, but later it also became very, very important for clearing blockages or for purposes of inspection. So the photo on the right shows you how the vent really looks like from the bottom. And if you look carefully, you would see what I've annotated right now. You will see footholes. So this is so that it's easier for people or the people who are inspecting to come down and check for problems. Often these water would be running through these tunnels, and often these vents or wells were also used. I mean, a pulley would be attached to it, and people or villages living around would also use the pulley to draw water out of it. So it also functioned as a well. So this is what it looks like on top. It's barely a meter by meter square. And yeah, so it's been closed. We couldn't really see it as a series because it's been closed in many, many places. So we were really lucky with the help of people from Bijapur. We could actually go down into one of the wells near the Sainik School and Inspection Bangla and really see what it looks like from the inside. This is not from Bijapur, it's from Iran, but it's just to show you, because in Iran, it runs for kilometers. In India, mostly we have very, very short stretches of 3-6 kilometers, but here it goes on for hundreds of kilometers. And this is an aerial view of how the vents or the wells really look like from, in an aerial view. We couldn't really see that in Bijapur because there's a lot of development all around. So we couldn't really see, so which is why I'm showing you this as an example. So this is another image of the section, showing the section. So it's not a very, it doesn't look the same in all the places. So at the beginning, like I told you, it was like the photograph I showed you before. The photograph on the left is a section very close to the mother well. And the photograph on the right is where it's in the midsection, which is much, much deeper. It's about 45 feet deep. I feel that after having studied the differences and after having walked through short sections of the surang from the inside, I feel that there were two different types of construction that might have been in use. So the first stretch from the surang Bavli, that's from near the mother well, a short stretch I don't think was tunneled under the ground, but I feel that a trough which was open on top, a trough or a channel, a deep channel was really made, and a vaulted roof was constructed over it and earth filled on top of it. Whereas if you go into the midsection, it was actually tunneled under the ground. It was not really a trough, but it was tunneled under the ground. So this is the differences in construction. Again, in both, you see that the sides, the vertical sides mostly have been left unlined, but the top, where the well is, it has been lined with masonry so that it doesn't really cave in. This is really an odd section. It shouldn't be like this. It should rest somewhere, but yeah. So okay. Now, like I told you, this whole the surang runs for 3 kilometers to the east of Bijapur, and it along its course there were pipes. There would be pipes connected to other water bodies for use by the public. And ultimately, all the overflow, the excess water would flow into the moat of the citadel. Now, there is a problem of flash flooding in these surangs or karries, because if there's too much water, if there's too much rain, and if there's too much water in the well or in the mother well, all of that would be, and all the infiltrated water would also be conveyed in it. And since Bijapur, the city, the fortified city, is located at a depression, there is a chance that it can flood the whole city. And since they didn't want that to happen, at several places along the surang underground, there were sluices in order to regulate the amount of water that would go into the city. Now, there's this very interesting thing that's also happening. So along with, there's the Surang Bawli, which is here, which carries the water eastwards into the city of Bijapur. But at some point, in order to augment the water supply of the Surang Bawli, two other water sources were identified. One that you see here is a dam, like I showed you in the first slide. It's an earthen dam, which would impound water behind it on the south of it. And from there, using sluices and conveyed through pipes, through terracotta pipes, it would take about 1.5 to 2 kilometers stretch. It would take the water, convey the water into the area around the Surang Bawli again. So this was, we believe that it was identified so as to augment the water supply of the Surang Bawli. Sorry, yeah. So these are images of what the pipes really look like. They're not large, but they're very, very small. They're just 15 to 20 centimeter in diameter. And in many places, they're not even seen because they're meant to be underground. But it's just so that because of plowing and because of being exposed to the elements for so long, some of them have really come out onto the surface, and we were lucky enough to see it. So the photograph on your left shows, it shows you a line where a pipe would have passed, but it's still underground. And the photograph on your right shows you a pipe that was exposed. And this is yet another photograph that shows you in a bit more detail. So these are very short sections of 20 centimeter long and 15 to 20 centimeter dia pipes, which would be in the shape of a wedge or a cone, so that one would fit into the other. And that's how they formed these 3 kilometer long stretches. Now, all of these pipes would be embedded in it would be laid on a bed of lime concrete, which you see here. So this is the pipe, and this is the layer of lime concrete, in fact, a very, very thick layer of lime concrete, all of which rests on a stone bed underneath. So basalt stone, locally available stone, would be laid in a series, and this whole structure would have come up on top of it. And this is how water was conveyed over very, very long distances. Apart from the karries, of course, this is yet another system by which they conveyed water. So using these pipes from the dam on the south of the Surang Bawli, water was conveyed into the Surang Bawli again. And yet another, so I said there were two sources that they had identified. One is on the south and one is on the southwest, which is near the village of Turvi, and which Henry Cousins has labeled as a Turvi waterworks source, or it is also called as a Turvi reservoir. So a similar looking dam would have existed out here. And this whole stretch is a bit intriguing, because there is a very short section. The blue section that you see is the karries or the surang, and the yellow is the pipe. So here, there's a very, very short section of the karries that runs for, about 1.5 kilometers into the village of Turvi, then Navraspur. And from there, we don't really know what happens. We couldn't really find it in records. And even 100 years ago, I think, when Cousins surveyed it, he didn't really have a clear idea of what really happened there. But from Turvi, this karries or this surang was joined by a pipeline, which you see in yellow, which went for another 2.5 kilometers northeast, deflected southeast, and joined the Surang Bawli region again. So this is very, interesting and intriguing for me, because why would they use two different techniques to convey water here? Why is it that the tunnel stopped? Because the slope is quite gradual, and why didn't they build, if the aim of it was to augment the water of Surang Bawli and the Kharees that goes into Bijapur, why didn't they construct a tunnel all the way into Surang Bawli? So I just wanted to consider, is it possible that this tunnel was not really meant to supply water to Bijapur, but it was actually meant to supply water to Navraspur, which was under construction in the late 16th and early 17th century. So, but when the whole idea of Navraspur, when place was ravaged after Malik Ambar's attack, and the construction didn't really continue, is it possible that at a much later date, they thought, okay, why not use the water in Torvi and divert it into Bijapur again? That is one. And the second question I have is, why did they need to augment the supply alone? So it's again not clear as to what is the chronological order of these dam construction and the pipelines laying. So is it possible that the Kharees came first and the pipelines came later? Why did they need to augment the water supply in the Kharees or the Surang line? Is it because the Kharees or the Surang did not function as expected? Probably the mother well did not convey enough, did not give enough water to be conveyed for the population in Bijapur? Or is it that records show that during the time of Ibrahim Adilshah and Muhammad Adilshah, the population really spiked? Traders and military men all would inhabited the city of Bijapur. So is it that the population really grew so that they needed this additional water supply? So these are two possibilities that we really have to think about. So that's with the sources on the western part of the city. I'd also like to make another point here, where if you notice that in our surveys now, and even in the surveys 30 years ago and even 100 years ago by cousins, the Kharees or the Surang could not be traced beyond this point. That's a little west of Ibrahim Roza. We see the vents or the wells till there, but beyond which we don't really see anything. So this is another question that I have, because if you look at here, if you could read, if it's big enough for you to read here, it says supposed position of Aurangzeb's battery. So we know that Aurangzeb laid a very, very long, went into years at many months long siege, and he and his army would station outside of the city walls. So is it possible that for a defensive purpose, they really sealed off the tunnel or the surang that went into the city just for their own defense? That's another possibility that we have to consider, because now we have absolutely no idea about what really happened to the Kharees beyond this red line here. The next source that I want to talk to you about is on the south of the city. So this was built much later. It was built in the early 17th century during the time of Muhammad Adil Shah, and he had commissioned this work to Afzal Khan, who sort of got this whole thing constructed. Now, if you can see it here, this is called the Begum Tank or the Begum Talab, sometimes also called the Sarovar, which is a 0.8 square kilometer big tank. At least that's what is there now. And very similar to the previous examples, a dam or an embankment was built so as to hold water south of it. And from there, again, we have this long series of pipeline, which goes 5 kilometers north into the city walls, providing water into the public fort, and goes further into the Arkila or the citadel to provide water also for the palaces and the gardens and everything that's there within the citadel. Just show you, I would also like to show you a 17th century map where it's written in Farsi. We couldn't really translate it, but if you look at I will just annotate the pictures. I mean the water lines here. On the west, you see the Kharees line, which goes under the outer fort's moat, under the fort walls, which means they were probably constructed. They were both constructed by Ali Adilshahi anyway, so it was a phased, planned development. It would go under the fort wall. It would go right in front of Taj Baoli, and it would supply water into the moat. This bit is clear. Here again, they don't really show the northern branch, which would have supplied water to the northern part of the city. And on the south, and please ignore the scale because it really is nothing. I mean, the fort, the distances are really not like what it is today on ground. And on the south, if you see, is the Begum Talab. And from the Begum Talab, for 4 kilometers, there are pipelines that connect, that convey water into the fort wall. Again, it passes under the fort wall, under the moat, under the fort wall, into the public fort, provides water into the citadel, but also goes further north and provides water into the tank, the big tank in front of Asar Mahal, from where there is a branch that goes east and finally conveys water to the Gol Gumbaz and the gardens around it. So this is how, so just the short, till the fort wall is 5 kilometers, it's much, much longer that it conveys within the fort wall. Sorry, yeah. So this is a photograph of the Begum Talab, and you don't really see, there's a jogging track that's been planned and developments are coming up there. So on the bund itself, but this structure that you see is really the control tower, which was later restored by the British. So which means that they probably still used this structure. And inside the structure is where the sluice gates are. Okay. Now there's another interesting, a new water structure that really comes into here, which I would like to introduce here. So the pipes are connected. The pipes are actually, they lead into many of these water towers. So it's not just the pipes that are running for 5 kilometers long in one stretch, but at many, many places, there are these water towers into which the pipes convey water. So what these water towers really do is that, if you see the image or the section on the right, there is water which flows at a lower level into the water tank. And all the silt and the sediment in the water is really collected at the bottom. And at the top part, slightly above the inlet, there is an outlet which takes out clean water. And through pipes, it goes down and then it goes further. So there are many such water towers, or what's locally known as ganges, that exist in Bijapur. And one other reason, of course, it acted as a sedimentation tank. But one other use of it is also that it relieved the pressure of the pipes, and it also made inspection easier, because these water towers could be accessed. So you see stairways on the left, you see stairways running to the top, and there are similar stairways that go down also. So for the people who are inspecting and who are cleaning the tank, it would be easier. So it served 3 purposes really. So there's the sedimentation, releasing the pressure of the pipes, and for inspection purposes.
Saparya, 5 more minutes.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so this is another view of the Ganj, which shows you an opening on the top from where they could have got down into the water level. And this is yet another photograph of how it looks like today. So I think depending on the kind or the quantity of water that was conveyed, the size of the ganges would vary. So the previous one would be about 25 to 30 feet in height, but there are smaller ones which are about 10 feet or even smaller. If you the branch that supplies water to the Gol Gumbaz is actually much smaller than the one you see here. This photograph is from Shahpur, of a ganj in Shahpur. So all this while, and also all the structures that Henry Cousins really mapped were of the public works. But I'd also like to add here that there were several innumerable baolis or wells, stepped wells, that were also constructed by private people in association with religious structures, in association with residences for domestic purposes. number of Baulis were constructed both within the fortified wall and outside. So in the early 1800s, there is a British record which says that there were at least 700 Baulis in Bijapur. When we went for survey in 2016, there were about 200. So I think 700 would probably not be an exaggeration. So Baulis again were of varying scales. So this picture, this engraving that you see here is of the Taj Bauli. Now the Taj Bauli was not just, it was not just a Bauli which provided water, but there were sarais attached to it. There was a religious building attached to it. So it functioned on multiple levels. But the ones or the Baulis in agricultural fields or attached to residences were much, much smaller in scale. And this picture kind of gives you an idea of how it really looked like. Again, as you see in the picture, the side walls, the vertical walls are lined in basalt masonry, but the floor of the Bauli was left unlined. There was no construction on it, so as to allow the natural aquifer water to seep out from the bottom. And this is a well. So the main difference between a Bauli and a well is that there is a step access into the Bauli, as we'll see in a few photographs. And in a well, there is no access. You'll have to draw water using pulleys from the top level itself. One of the reasons it's said why Bijapur has so many Baulis is that it's possible that they quarried material locally for all of their architectural works. So wherever there was a quarry, many of them were actually reused or just lined, made into a square shape and reused as a Bauli. And many were not really lined with masonry, but like you see in the picture here, there was just one there was a pedestal sort of made with a pulley system attached to it so that people could draw water conveniently. Such systems exist mostly in agricultural fields. The ones that you see with attached to houses or with religious buildings usually are more finished than this one. And this is just to show you the various parts of the Bauli. One is, like I said, there is a stepped access, which is not there in a well or a kuwa. And another interesting feature is this ramp that you see on the left. So bullocks would usually be used to climb up the ramp, and there would be pulleys that would be fixed on these little projecting stone slabs, and water would be drawn from the Bauli using this. I think the next picture would give you a clearer idea of this. Sorry. Yeah, so this shows you this arched, most Baulis have this feature, which is an arched entranceway from where steps lead down into the water level. And this shows you the projecting structure where pulleys would be attached so that it's easier for people to draw water. This shows you very clearly there's a front view and a side view with the Gol Gumbas in the background of how bullocks were used, and the posts were usually of wood, and we don't see any of them today. And these big leather baskets would be used bags would be used to draw water. And yeah, this is yet another view. And once the water is drawn, there would be a small sink kind of thing on top of this elevation. And the water would be collected in the sink, and a channel would take or convey the water to a tank at the bottom level, from which, again, through open channels, it would go into the agricultural fields. So that is how this whole system worked. So I'd just like to end with the waterworks today and what is the status of it. During our survey, we noticed that it's mostly in the agricultural fields that the Baulis are really used. The story is really different with the Karris and the pipelines because of plowing and because of wear and tear and just exposure to the elements over 400 years. They've really deteriorated. The Karris is blocked, the surang is blocked in sections, and there is also sewerage and garbage waste being disposed into this gallery. And the Baulis on the suburbs are still in use, like you see in the picture today. This is from Torvi, near Torvi in Sandal Bauli, where you see women washing clothes quite regularly. So they use it, if not for drinking water, they at least use it for their other domestic needs. But in the city, so this is very close to the walls of the Bijapur city on the east, people don't, although there are still Baulis and there's still water in it, people don't really rely on it for their domestic needs instead, because I guess it's not fit for drinking anymore. So they rely on the government schemes and the water supply systems that are available today for the daily water needs. This is also to show you how the place really has changed. Bijapur is a growing city, so and it's the fort wall is already fully occupied, so they're really spreading to the west and the east. So the leftmost photograph shows you a Bauli in 2001, which still existed. So this is near the mother well of the Kares. And when you look at the photograph of 2007, it's already filled. And I myself have seen so many Baulis being filled when we went out for survey. So I think this is a continuing thing because people need land for development, and this is nobody uses the water in a Bauli, so why not just fill it up and construct over it? And this image in 2016 shows that there's already a building that's come up. Yeah.
Shall we open it for questions now?
Just a couple more slides, Basant. Just give me 2 minutes, please. So this again is the story of the Kares from the inside. So people have put stone slabs on top and constructed over it. A lot of them are diverting their sewerage into it. So again, it doesn't really function as a water system. And there's also blockages in between. So it wouldn't convey water continuously. And because of disuse, the structure itself is slowly deteriorating. And you also see the problem of waste disposal into these Baulis because they're not really used. So people dump their garbage into it. Because of that, the water is not fit for domestic use, and the cycle sort of continues. And one fine day they see, okay, why do we even need it? It's filled up and not used again. Just 2 points about the rehabilitation efforts. Since 2015-16, I think there's been a lot of interest. There are local heritage groups that have submitted proposals to the district collectors that they say that Bijapur faces such a big water problem and we really need to do something and adapt these Baulis for today's use. And there are many groups that I'm aware of that are also doing videos and uploading them as for dissemination, and also taking tourists into the Kares wells and to show them that Bijapur is not just about Gol Gumbaz and Ibrahim Raza, but there's this water system that also you should see. And very recently, last year, the World Monuments Fund added the water systems of the Deccan, I think it's called, onto their watch list. So as to bring global attention to this neglected heritage, so that people, if the local bodies can really think about adapting it. And water is a big problem there. So why not use existing systems instead of constructing new ones? So there's a lot of rehabilitation efforts that have been underway. And I also read a report about how the district collector himself the district office administration itself have identified about 145 Baulis that they propose to rehabilitate in the future. So I think I'll end with that and we'll open for questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Saparya. I'm going to just thank you. It's excellent, I think, very informative as well. I just wanted to read questions directly from the chat so that we can move quicker. One question which was very interesting was, were there any natural springs which were used, or how, where did the water come from in the sources that you talked about? Is it just groundwater or is it the rain water?
So I think most of the dams are rainwater and also the runoff water from rains, but the Kares really taps into natural aquifers, groundwater. Okay. Sharath has asked a question. Were there any similar water systems constructed pre and post Adilshahi rule other than Kares in Bizar? I think you spoke about Ahmednagar and Burhanpur and all that. Which would probably be contemporary, but to Adilshahi. But I think that one which is earlier is definitely Bidar, which is older, definitely older than the Bijapur example. Okay. The next question is about is by Vishalachi. She's asking about, can you explain more about the sedimentation tanks hydrodynamics? The Ganj, I think you spoke about. So okay. So honestly, we've not really gone into the Ganj because most of them were inaccessible. So, but from reading from reports by people who've gone into the Ganj, maybe I should just go back to the slide. Okay. So Yeah, so it would, so these are not just on the surface. That's one thing I'd like to clarify. It also went quite deep, like 10, 20 feet under the ground also. So which is, and the pipes were underground. So which means the inlet would really come, all of this is happening under the ground. But of course, there's this big water tower on top. So if there's excess water, these gunges would really store that much more water. Now, the inlet really comes in at a lower level, so that all the silt and sediment would settle down at the bottom of the tank to be later cleaned up. And clear water, after it settles, clear water would be diverted by pipes on top. And like I said, there are stairways to access the bottom of it, I guess, for inspection and cleaning and to look at blockages and all that. So since I've not really seen what the inside of it looks like, this is all I know. But I do know that some of these gunges not just supplied water in two directions. There is one gunge in the citadel near the Makkah Masjid in the citadel, which so these were not just sedimentation tanks, but they also worked as distribution centers. So the gunge near Makkah Masjid is known to have supplied at least 70 different pipes, 70 different pipes were supposed to have come out of it. So that, it really distributed water through these pipes into various parts of the city also. So that's yet another function of these gunges, yeah.
So I'm just going to club a couple questions about why it is not maintained, and Anis is asking, can the Karez be cleaned to or conserved for tourism?
Yes, definitely. And I think they've already, if I know right, the district administration is already doing that. That's how the Surang Baoli itself got, they excavated it. I don't know if they've restored it. I'm really not sure. But it can be, because as we've worked in Bidar also, we've worked on the rehabilitation of the Bidar Karez also, where we've spent many years cleaning the Karez. But actually, it's not just for tourism. We also hope that it will be also used as a water supply system. In Bijapur, I really don't know, because I think the changes have been too drastic. There are buildings that have come up on top. The mother well, we don't really know what is the status. So I think hydrological studies have to be done to see if it can function as a water supply system. But definitely for tourism, I think it can be restored.
Yeah. Yes. Have you gone inside the Karez, and what is the condition? I think this year's, but yeah, you can.
Yeah, I have like the picture that I showed you is a photograph that I myself took of the Karez. That's this. So we can't really enter the Karez. So there is a place where it's collapsed. That's near the Sainik School, just opposite in the district civil hospital campus, where it's collapsed. So that's one place where you can enter, but not really go too long. There are other spots inside the Sainik School campus and inside the inspection bungalow campus and very close to the mother well. There are a few points where the vents are open and people can actually go in and see, but it's really filthy inside, because like I said, sewerage has been diverted into the Karez in several places. So it's not really safe to walk around, but yes, you can go inside.
Yeah, Anis is asking, is having a water system near the monument has anything to do with its longevity? But I think they're not really next to the monument. They themselves are monuments in some cases, right? So, I mean, but there are wells inside the monument for the maintenance. Like Gol Gumbaz, we have a Bavdi inside.
And also for the gardens, because there were several gardens that were located both inside the city walls and outside. So I think these water bodies also supplied water to the gardens.
Yeah, Sharath is asking about what technological tools did you use for mapping these various structures?
So we used GIS-based mobile survey. We used an app called Fulcrum. There are also other apps, data collection apps called Collector, which is linked to the ArcGIS. So these are some tools that we've used, where we would go on site and get the GPS location of it. And I designed the forms beforehand and put it up on this app. And we would take it, it was much easier than the paper-based survey, because we'd have sheets of paper and write on it and then again translate it back. So I think directly filling it up on a tab or a phone was much easier for us. but the GPS location was really problematic. We couldn't rely on the phone's GPS, so we needed to use either Google Earth or a GPS equipment to get the accurate coordinates of this place. That's how we did. And then later so the best thing about Collector and Fulcrum is that we could save all the information. It would come as fields, but later we could also export it as a CSV or a KML or whichever file that we wanted to use. We could directly put it up on GIS. So it was really helpful. I hope that answers your
question.
Yeah.
You mentioned the nearest river, that is Doni, which is about 20 kilometers from
Bijapur. South of Bijapur. Yeah. Yes. And Krishna is about 50 kilometers south of.
And currently, I think in today, Bijapur water comes from Krishna River, which is 56
kilometers, which is quite, I mean, maybe if these systems if they are adapted and reused, I think it would definitely help.
Yeah, one interesting question from Akka Mahadevi is that, can you let us know what population does this water system serve?
I'm not really sure because I've really read conflicting numbers, but I think a few lakhs. The population of Bijapur is supposed to have run into a few lakhs during the time of Muhammad Adilshahi. Yeah. I'm not sure how I won't be able to answer your question, but it definitely was a big population.
At the peak, I think in Muhammad Adilshahi time, it was in the top 10 populous cities of the world.
Yes.
At that time, it was about 7 lakhs or something. Yeah. Seems less, but yeah. Madhusudan is asking, is there any effort of revival, which we just talked about briefly? Yeah.
Yes. So like I said, there are local heritage groups who are quite actively, at least whatever they can do, they are bringing attention to this system. And I believe that the district administration is also taking a lot of efforts, at least that's what I read in the newspaper reports, that they're trying to rehabilitate and restore at least the Baulis, because they'll definitely help with the water problems here. If not the Karez and the pipelines, which would probably only be for tourism, but restoring the Baulis would definitely help.
Yeah. Swati's question is about other Karez Kanat system. We spoke about it. I think it's there in Ahmednagar, Burhanpur, Bidar, Bijapur. Anything else I missed, Saparya?
No, and there are variations of this in Pune also. I think, there's one much later variation of it in Pune. I think that's about it. These are the places that I know. Pipeline, yes, you see in most of these places. So even Golconda has pipelines that have been used to supply water. Daulatabad has pipelines. So the terracotta pipelines are very, very prevalent. But the Karez, I think, these are the places, the ones you mentioned.
Okay. I think we are almost done with the questions. Thank you, Saparya. I think that the Doni River still exists, Ali, but I think it's very it's not continuously, what do you say, water. In summer sometimes it dries up. If no one has any other question, okay, thank you, Saparya. Sorry, I rushed with questions. If anyone else has a question, we can can wait for one or a couple of minutes.
Sure.
No. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you, Saparya. So for everyone else's information, we are hoping to do more of these webinars about Deccan, and also like next week, I think we have a plan to do on Rajasthan. So on Sambar actually. So so that we will keep you informed. Please look out for our Facebook, Instagram pages, and whoever is on our email list will also get it. Thank you for joining. I think it was great. Please let us know your feedback. If you want to write to us, we are historywalas@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.